Today we have Raka speaking on Zen and the joy of giving up. Zen. To describe Zen, it's like describing the taste of honey to somebody who has never tasted honey. And so, Zen demands you not to come with beliefs and preconceptions, etc., but sit down and meditate. Zen Buddhism, Zazen. The heart of Zen Buddhism is mindfulness, sitting down quietly and exploring your own thoughts and the awareness that's there. It's very important because we come with so much baggage to search the truth. Zen Buddhism has been, rather I would say, it's out of Mahayana Buddhism, which blended with Chinese Confucianism and Taoism, etc. But it's the heart of Japanese, you can say, Buddhism. Essentially, make your mind peaceful and the wisdom will start emanating out of it. It has become popular because you are the only support. There's no other support. You sit down. Sit down on a cushion, sit down anywhere, but sit down and meditate and meditate and meditate till you get that insight, clear insight. That's the reason why they don't dwell too much on metaphysics and etc. doctrines. However, Zen Buddhism, they claim a continuous teacher discipleship for more than 2,000 years. So the start of Buddhism in India. So this has now become more prolific because many types of people, they are coming in and being attracted towards this plain and simple sitting down and meditating. Raka I won't tell you much about her, she'll introduce herself, but she is a priest in Zen Buddhism, and she has also blended Vedanta in her practices, which is unique. The fundamentals you can find, they are both they speak in the same voice. So I'll present to you Raka to speak on Zen and the joy of giving up.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you. Start with a brief chant. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha. Thank you, Maharaj, for that introduction. I grew up in this tradition of Advaita Vedanta and then was also ordained as a novice priest by Sensei Joshin Burns in 2021, and I'm currently studying with Sensei Genzan Quenel. And yes, this is called Zen and the Joy of Giving Up, but I actually had 4 different titles for this talk. So I had Zen and the Razor's Edge, Zen and the Secret Practice, Zen and the Fire of Attention, and finally I landed on Zen and the Joy of Giving Up. But the thing is, this talk is really kind of about all of those things. So I thought I'd turn them into sections of the talk. So a progression of sorts. So that's what we'll do. The razor's edge, the secret practice, the fire of attention, and finally, the joy of giving up. So to begin, the razor's edge. The phrase, as many of you probably know, comes from the Katha Upanishad. Sharp like a razor's edge, the sages say, is the path, difficult to traverse. And just before that line, it says, get up, wake up, seek the guidance of an illumined teacher and realize the self. A little similar to Swami Vivekananda's powerful line, arise, awake, and stop not until the goal is reached. So this path that we're traversing, the spiritual path, and how we're traversing it, is laid out very clearly in the Katha Upanishad. I'm quoting, know the self as the lord of the chariot, the body as the chariot itself, the discriminating intellect as the charioteer, and the mind as reins. The senses, say the wise, are the horses. Selfish desires are the roads they travel. When the self, capital Self, is confused with the body, mind, and senses, he seems to enjoy pleasure and suffer sorrow. When a person lacks discrimination and his mind is undisciplined, the senses run hither and thither like wild horses. But those with a still mind and a pure heart, with a discriminating intellect as charioteer and a trained mind as reins, they attain the supreme goal of life, to be united with the Lord of love. So the self, what we call in Hinduism Brahman, what we call Buddha nature or suchness, or the big self in Zen, this true self is the Lord of the chariot. Our body is the chariot, our intellect is the charioteer, the mind is the reins. So with the power of our charioteer intellect, we can turn the reins of the mind to control the horses of the senses, to move them from running around seeking pleasure and avoiding pain to traversing the path towards wisdom and realization of the self. Sounds simple enough, right? I mean, what a nightmare. Like, hence the razor's edge. There are so many ways to fall off the path. Let's just start with the whole seeking pleasure and avoiding pain part. In so many ways, this goes against our primal instincts. Just the thought of a nice, tasty meal can flood our mind with exciting images and delicious imaginings of delicious tastes, enough to drive out any erstwhile thoughts of spiritual disciplines. Or when it comes to avoiding pain, how many of us are ready to give up our nicely temperature-controlled homes? How difficult is it to get ourselves just to go to the gym and lift some weights, even though we'll feel great afterwards? This whole business of controlling the horses of the senses is no easy feat. And what's more, even getting that dang charioteer intellect on board is rough. Sure, he says, we could wake up early and meditate this morning, but wouldn't it be better to sleep in just a little? After all, you sneezed a few times yesterday, you could be getting sick. Sleep is important. He makes a good case, you think. How do you even know who to trust? Who is even running the show in there? We think of our minds as unitary, but more and more, theory and research seem to point in the direction that this is not the case. And you can confirm that in your own experience. Call them self-states or different parts of the mind or gremlins, but it's a plain fact. We call them gremlins, but it's a plain fact to see that we're at war with ourselves constantly. Different parts or self-states are battling it out for supremacy all the time throughout our days. Just speaking for myself, I've got a part that wants to go to sleep at a reasonable hour and another part that wants to stay up late reading the latest horrors on the New York Times. There's the part that wanted to write this talk and a part that absolutely did not want to write this talk. There's a part that wants to lower my hemoglobin A1C and a part that wants the vegan gluten-free brownie from Cafe Flora, highly recommended, by the way. So the mind is not unitary. The reins are herring off in all different directions, never mind the horses. This rein wants the horse of the eyes to go this way. That rein wants the horse of the nose to go that way. It's a real mess. So we fall off the path, despite our best intentions. We can't walk a straight line, as much as we feel like we should be able to. Our lives twist and turn in all sorts of unexpected directions, and we're blown about by the winds of our circumstances. Okay, so it's something of a bleak picture. And I'm going to move in a more uplifting direction, I promise, but not just yet, because it gets worse. So I'm getting to the second section of the talk now, the secret practice. This is an idea from Joko Beck. She's a Zen teacher who wrote some of my favorite books on Zen. Her student Barry Magid put it this way in one of his talks, in which he was trying to describe how to give a beginner instruction on how to meditate. He said, the actual instruction may be less important than the student being able to honestly inquire about what they think they ought to be doing, or why they're here, or what they're trying to accomplish. All of that comes under the heading of what I call the secret practice. What the person is really up to, regardless of what instruction they received. I bolded this part in my talk. Because if they are troubled by the contents of their mind, one way or another, whatever you tell them, they are secretly trying to obliterate that part of themselves that is disturbing them. Their thoughts or their feelings, their pain or their wandering minds, their lustful minds, their angry minds. So we always have to find out what the real intention of the student is. What beginner's instruction have they already given themselves before they walked in the door? And make it explicit, be honest about it. Try to figure out why that has become your agenda. End of the quote. I find this such a powerful and accurate description of the experience of spiritual practice for so many of us. As Barry Magid put it, what the person is really up to, regardless of what instruction they received. So, what are we really up to? What are we pushing away? What are we trying to hide from ourselves? What can't we bear to look at? What are we actually doing on the cushion? I've thought to myself many times that pathology, psychological problems, persist in obscurity. Our psychological problems, whatever they may be, and we all have them, persist in obscurity. They persist because we don't see them, because we've become incredibly skilled at hiding them from ourselves. And we hide them from ourselves for a lot of good reasons. They might be genuinely more than we can bear. The trauma or the grief or the loss that we've experienced in life might be too much for us to face at any given moment. So often, after the death of someone we deeply care about, there's a tendency to drown ourselves in busyness, in logistics, preparing for the funeral, filling out paperwork, dealing with personal effects. And we can just push down that grief, not look at it, not deal with it. But it's there. Or when we've been abused, deeply mistreated, and maybe somewhere there's tremendous anger in ourselves over how much we've been hurt. And we hide that too. Safer not to look at it, better not to look at it. But it's there. And again, there are good reasons for this hiding things from ourselves. One of the more painful but resonantly true ideas that I've come across in my psychological learnings is the idea of the moral defense, developed by Ronald Fairbairn, a Scottish psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. He's one of the main thinkers who developed the object relations theory in psychoanalysis, which is a little complicated. I won't go too much into it. But basically, an object is the internalized representation of someone important for an individual. So for a child, his main objects are his caregivers, his parents. Or rather, the image that he has of his parents in his mind. So now, quoting from Fairbairn, quote, It becomes obvious, therefore, that the child would rather be bad himself than have bad objects, i.e., bad parents. And accordingly, we have some justification for surmising that one of the child's motives in becoming bad is to make his objects, his parents, good. In becoming bad, he takes on the burden of badness, which appears to reside in his objects, his parents. By this means, he seeks to purge them of his badness, and in proportion as he succeeds in doing so, he is rewarded by that sense of security which an environment of good objects so characteristically confers. Outer security is purchased at the price of inner security. This might all sound a little bit complicated, but what he's basically saying is that it's safer for children to hide from themselves the truth of their parents' mistreatment or abusiveness by telling themselves that they, the child, are the bad one. It's like, you know, mommy's good. She doesn't want to have to hit me just because I was crying too loudly and it was annoying her, so that was bad of me. I just have to not do that anymore. Why would a child do this? To preserve the security of their environment, their sense of trust that their caregivers are reliable and good, they themselves take on the shame, the harm, the badness. As Fairbairn put it very poetically, it's better to be a sinner in a world ruled by God than to live in a world ruled by the devil. So that's just one way that we might hide things from ourselves, to protect ourselves in a dangerous world that we can't bear to see in its reality. We hide things from ourselves because we're not ready to take them on yet. Maybe we don't have the resources, the time, the energy to really look at the psychic pain that we have borne in our lives. We hide things from ourselves to keep being able to live in a way that is convenient for us in the moment. Maybe we're deeply unsatisfied with our work, but we can't afford to quit because we're taking care of our family. So we hide from ourselves how deeply demoralized we feel at our jobs, or how alone we feel in our relationships. Maybe we can't face the emptiness and existential dread at the core of our psyche, so we hide it by staying busy, by watching Netflix, going to shows. Maybe we can't face the fact that we are all born alone and die alone, and fundamentally we live our lives alone, lost within our little minds. So perhaps the anguish of that loneliness is too much to bear, so we hide that from ourselves by throwing ourselves into our work. There are so many things that we can't bear to face within our psyches. And this is the painful truth of the secret practice. We think that somehow, by practicing meditation and spiritual disciplines, we can escape all this pain that we can't bear to face, but also can't seem to get away from. The thing is, there is never any way out but through. People often say, you know, meditation is a one-stop shop for all that ails you, but I'm here to tell you that it's not the case. The psyche seems to operate according to the law of the conservation of energy, or like whack-a-mole. You know, if anger bubbles up somewhere and we try to suppress it, it still has to go somewhere. And most likely, if we can't face it or integrate it or sublimate it or transform it somehow, it ends up coming out sideways. This is why so many things end up coming out in our spiritual practices and communities. Going back to what I said about there being so many ways to fall off the path, one of the major phenomena that I've seen happen across many spiritual communities is our common tendency to harness the moral tenets, the powerful teachings, to suppress our emotions. So here's an example, the beautiful words of the Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi, when she said, "I tell you one thing, if you want peace, do not find fault with others. Rather, learn to see your own faults. Learn to make the world your own. No one is a stranger, my child. The whole world is your own." It's a beautiful, beautiful teaching. And powerful. It's a direct pointing to the ultimate truth. If we stop just looking outward at others and our external circumstances and instead look within to discover the problems within us that are occluding our vision, we might begin to be able to see more clearly on an ultimate level that the only true thing within is not a thing at all, but that ultimate self, Brahman, Buddha nature, which is manifesting as all this. So indeed, the whole world is our own. The whole world is nothing other than our own true self. But what if I just look at the part that says, don't find fault with others, rather learn to see your own faults? And then someone mistreats me in some way, behaves in a demeaning way, degrades me, disrespects me, insults me, walks over me. And I feel upset. I feel hurt. But then I think, oh, wait, the Holy Mother said not to find fault with others. So then I try to search for any way to exculpate them. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean to disrespect me. Maybe when they laughed at me, that was just in fun. Maybe when they yelled at me, they didn't realize they were yelling. Maybe when they threatened me, they were just having a bad day. Maybe when they insulted me, they really didn't mean it. You know, when they pressured me into doing them a favor and then didn't thank me, they just forgot. We might take it a step further, learning to see our own faults. Oh, maybe I brought it upon myself somehow. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm taking things too personally. I should be more giving and not care whether I'm thanked or not. I should be more equanimous and shouldn't be affected by someone yelling at me. If I just meditated more, something like this wouldn't bother me. Any of those things might be true, but if our tendency is to continuously search for any way to justify why someone might have mistreated us and continuously search for any way to shift the blame onto ourselves, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like the moral defense that I mentioned earlier? That it's easier to be a sinner in a world ruled by God than to live in a world ruled by the devil? After all, if we just take everything upon ourselves, then maybe we can control ourselves well enough that nothing will bother us anymore. Maybe we can become so humble and accommodating that we just vanish right into the ground. So we won't even notice when someone walks over us. I hope it's clear as I say all this that this isn't good. Like, this isn't a good interpretation of that beautiful teaching. But we do this. You know, we have a tendency to misunderstand these deep spiritual teachings by interpreting them along the lines of how our psyches protected us when we were children. If the best way to make sure that we received care from our caregivers was to suppress our emotions and not make a scene, you can bet that those patterns are still within us. If our tendency was to make ourselves disappear as a child so as not to be the target of negative attention, when we hear "don't find fault with others," we take that as yet more grist for the mill. Yes, yes, absolutely. Let me just grind my own sense of self down even further. Let me make myself even smaller than I am. Instead, a better teaching for a person with such a psyche, and this isn't everyone, but those of you probably know who you are, a better teaching for someone with such a psyche might be Ramakrishna's story about the snake. I'm just quoting from this parable here. There was a terrible poisonous snake who lived in an area where some cowherd boys used to tend their cows. One day a brahmachari was passing by that area, and the boys warned him of the snake. He kept on walking, and indeed the snake immediately came to attack him. But the brahmachari scolded the snake for going about attacking people, and then initiated him into spiritual practice by giving him a holy word. He told the snake, "Repeat that sacred word and do no harm to anybody." In time, the cowherd boys came to notice that the snake would no longer bite. It didn't even react when they threw stones at it. One day, one of the boys attacked the snake, dashing it again and again against the ground until it vomited blood and became unconscious. It survived, but became a mere skeleton covered with a skin, and would only come out at night for fear of the boys. Later, when the brahmachari came again to the area where the snake lived, he went to see the snake and saw that it had become very thin. The snake had completely forgotten the boy's mistreatment of him, but upon his teacher's inquiry into the snake's sad state, the snake remembered, saying, "Yes, revered sir, now I remember. Boys one day dashed me violently against the ground. They are ignorant, after all. They didn't realize what a great change had come across my mind. How could they know I wouldn't bite or harm anyone?" The brahmachari exclaimed, "What a shame! You are such a fool! You don't know how to protect yourself. I asked you not to bite, but I did not forbid you to hiss. Why didn't you scare them by hissing?" For someone who has built their life around a psychological strategy of being subservient, accommodating, pleasing, the hard psychological work that they will have to do is to learn how to hiss, to be able to protect themselves, to be able to stand up for themselves and for the people around them, not to submit to any random person with ill intent who makes an effort to dominate them in some way. But obviously, being submissive and subservient is not the only psychological strategy that a child can land on to get through a difficult childhood. There's another idea in psychoanalytic thought called identification with the aggressor. This was developed by Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter. And the idea here is that a child who's being mistreated in some way by his caregivers will internalize the harsh voice of the parent, recreating in his own psyche a punitiveness towards himself, and in such a way disidentifying himself from the pain and vulnerability of being the victim. Instead, by identifying with the aggressor, in this case the parent, he can punish himself. In this way, he can avoid behaviors that would lead to punishment by the parent. However, by identifying with that role of aggressor to cope with the childhood, the child may then start to take out that punitiveness towards others, eventually perhaps becoming the aggressive parent towards his own vulnerable children in the future. Right? This is one of the ways that these cycles of abuse or trauma can play out. So for someone with this kind of approach, psychological approach to the world, hearing the parable of the snake being told to hiss might instead help them to completely justify their pre-existing tendency towards aggression, entirely missing the point of not harming others. They might think, "That's right, I gave that barista a piece of my mind. Like, how dare she give me the wrong drink?" This is the tangled world of the psyche. We have all grown up in unique ways and have all faced different contexts that have shaped our psyches accordingly. And all of us have developed at least some unhealthy patterns that serve to get us through our childhoods to this point, but may not be serving us any longer, or those around us any longer. And these things then play out in all sorts of contexts, causing all sorts of havoc, including in our spiritual lives. At this point, some of you might be wondering, "Oh my God, why is she going on and on and on about all these psychological problems, these problems of the mind? Doesn't she know that it's all an illusion anyway? Doesn't Vedanta teach us that all this is Maya and ultimately unreal? Doesn't Buddhism teach us that the little self is just a construct, that there's no there?" So then why go on endlessly about these pointless little problems when we can simply see through the self? Why tangle yourself up in these silly little traumas when we can just simply see that we are none else but Brahman and be free? Just do some Jnana Yoga, for God's sake. Just disidentify with the mind and all your problems will disappear. Oh, just like that, huh? How's that working out for you so far? The path is a razor's edge, people. This is Maya, the workings of the mind, the tangle of traumas, the psychological patterns that keep us trapped. And Maya is not to be underestimated. Maya, the veil over the world that keeps us thinking that we are these individual, separate, isolated little beings stuffed into these deteriorating little bodies with minds that never give us a moment's peace. Maya is no joke. In Vedantic terms, Maya is the divine power of Shakti, the divine mother, dancing her dance and blowing us about like leaves in a storm. Just see through the self. In a story by the French poet Charles Baudelaire, there's a line that's often quoted, which goes something like, "The cleverest ruse of the devil is to persuade you that he doesn't exist." Now, I'm not comparing Maya with the devil, but I could venture a version of the quote that's something like, "The greatest trick of Maya is to persuade you that you're not caught." Then you're like the fish in the net of Sri Ramakrishna's parable, the fish who've been caught in the fisherman's net, who burrow into the mud with the net in their mouths, thinking, "We need not fear anymore. We are quite safe here." Okay, so after all this gloom and doom, what are we supposed to do? We're caught in the net. We're veiled by Maya into thinking that we're these small beings trapped in our bodies and minds. We're unwittingly carrying out psychological patterns that keep trapping us further and further. The reins are flapping loose. The horses of the senses are running wild. The charioteer is nowhere to be found. So, what do we do? This brings me to my next section, my next title, The Fire of Attention. As Barry Magid put in the talk that I quoted from earlier, most of our life is spent trying to fix and improve or escape. And meditation is very literally a matter of sitting still with the things we would otherwise avoid. As I said in my talk back in May, and as Marha just said earlier, Zen tells us to just sit, just meditate. Don't do anything. Just be with whatever is arising. Be fully present with whatever is in this moment. It's turning that old phrase on its head. Don't just sit there, do something. Instead, it's don't just do something, sit there. So, do we just sit like a bump on a log, dull, bored, vapid, or trying desperately to get our thoughts to stop? In her book, Everyday Zen, Joko Beck talks about the fire of attention. And she quotes a Zen master, Edo Roshi, who said, "This zendo, this meditation hall, is not a peaceful haven, but a furnace room for the combustion of our egoistic delusions." The combustion of our egoistic delusions. Yikes. Does not sound too pleasant. But again, going back to my last talk, I started that one off saying that practicing Zen Buddhism is mostly quite unpleasant. It's not fun to sit with all the things that we don't want to sit with. It's not fun to turn towards, to stop avoiding, to really be with our life as it is. Think for a moment, how often are you really present to your life just as it is? How many moments of your life are not spent running to and fro, your mind a haze of responsibilities and chores and minor excitements, the drudgery of traffic on the commute broken up by flashes of anger at the person honking at you from behind and pleasant images of the apple turnover that you'll pick up on your way home? The thing is, when we're fully present to our lives, the circumstances stay the same. There will still be the chores, the commute, the honking, the apple turnovers. But there can be a different quality to how we're experiencing each of these things, which changes everything. We can simply be with ourselves. In the chaplaincy training I did at Upaya Zen Center, we would always talk about coming alongside people, people who are in hospice, people who are grieving, their families who are grieving, just coming alongside them and being with whatever is happening for them, whatever they need to share. But can we do that for ourselves? Can we come alongside ourselves? Can we just sit with ourselves in the refining fire of our attention and let ourselves genuinely see ourselves for what we are? Can we take in all the love, the pettiness, the good intentions, the resentment, the hatred, the compassion, the rage, the curiosity, the altruism? Can we take in everything that we find within ourselves and just hold it with kind attention? This is the work, my friends. This is the work of spiritual practice. And this is also the work of psychological practice. They are, in my view, ultimately one and the same. We are working within the tangle of chaos that is our mind, coming alongside it, attending to it, accepting whatever we find within it, developing the courage and the strength to truly see into ourselves. And here I don't mean seeing the pure self within, the eternal Atman, our eternal Buddha nature. I mean seeing into the dark underbelly of our hidden motivations, our desire to get ahead, our fear of being perceived negatively, our cravings, our need to dominate or to submit, and also our desire to love, to be there for one another, to serve, to be kind. All of these things are intermingled within our little selves. And unless we take the time to truly see into what's happening, what we're really up to on the cushion, to see our secret practice for what it is, we will never be free of it. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." We will burrow into the fisherman's net of our minds and think to ourselves, we need not fear anymore. We are quite safe here. But instead, when we bring the fire of attention to ourselves, when we make the unconscious conscious, we finally start to see what we're really up to. And what we do then is tremendously important. As Buddhist nun Ayakima put it, recognize, no blame, change. Recognize what's happening. Don't blame yourself, and the change will naturally occur. Of course, this is the exact opposite of what we usually like to do. Recognize, no change, blame. In fact, half the time when I remember that quote, I usually remember it in that way, which is interesting. But blaming and shaming ourselves is exactly what keeps these types of patterns locked in. Shame and blame is the glue that holds the whole structure together. Instead, we have to see the whole chain of causes and conditions that led to this moment, to this unskillful behavior, to that harmful response. We can see that we are both not to blame for our unskillful strategies of how we're engaging in the world, and we are also the only ones that can change them. And how does that change come about? The fire of attention. Recognize, no blame, change. But then, as we keep practicing, as we keep bringing attention to our minds, as we keep observing our secret practice, what we're up to on the cushion, eventually we start to notice something else. We notice that we're not in charge. Wait. What the heck is this now? Have I not just gone on and on about how we have to bring attention to ourselves, we have to do our psychological work, blah, blah, blah. So what on earth do I mean now saying that we're not in charge? Okay, so this is the final section of my talk, the joy of giving up. In all honesty, it can be pretty hard to take in. We're going about diligently, we're doing our japa, we're practicing with our mantra, we're sitting quietly in zazen. Maybe we're even going to therapy, we're noticing the tendencies of our minds, we're trying to understand what we're up to on the cushion, trying to be with ourselves, come alongside ourselves, observe ourselves with kind attention. The thing is, once you've been practicing for long enough, something slowly starts to sink in. I'm not in charge of this. I can do my best, sure. I can try. I can try to point myself in the right direction. But on some level, the idea that we can take on this monumental task of seeing through the small self, of attaining liberation, of working through all our innumerable psychological tangles, that in itself is a form of delusion. Oh, it's a helpful delusion to some extent. I mean, if we were told from the beginning that the whole thing is hopeless, it's unlikely we'd ever get started. But the greatest lesson that I've learned on the spiritual path so far is giving up. We can't do this alone. The task is far too vast. Brahman itself can be translated as the vast. What does this little body-mind know about the vast? It's like we sing here in one of our songs here at the Vedanta Society. Who is there that can understand what Mother Kali is? The song asks us, does man imagine that he can swim across the boundless sea? But while my mind has understood, alas, my heart has not. Though but a dwarf, it still would strive to make a captive of the moon. We want to make a captive of the moon. We want to free ourselves from this prison of our mind and our body. We want to escape the countless pains and sorrows that are part and parcel of this human existence. But this is the nature of samsara. We are blown about like leaves in a storm. All we can do is trust the wind. Imagine a little leaf in a storm, determined. I'm not going to go that way. I'm going this way instead. It's not so easy, little leaf. We try so hard, but we need the winds of divine grace to blow us in the right direction. There's a reason that Sri Ramakrishna prescribed bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, for this age. So much is set against us. The horses of our senses, the turmoil of the world around us, the flapping reins of our mind. And once we practice for long enough, some realization sets in. I can't do this alone. There's a giving up, a surrender. But I promised you joy, the joy of giving up. And there is joy. There is real joy in it. There is joy in realizing I don't need to white-knuckle my way through this. I don't need to approach my spiritual practice like a marathon, like an athletic feat that I can muscle my way through sheer machismo and perseverance. Zen can have this macho side to it sometimes, or people interpret it that way. Strong determination sitting, sit through the pain. Practice as if saving your head from fire. But the true power for me comes from the giving up. Lord, it's in your hands. I offer myself up to Buddha nature. Make me an instrument. Let me do your will. Not I, but thou. Not I, but thou. Not I, but thou. What I'm trying to point to here is that there can be a tremendous I-ness, a tremendous little selfness in the pursuit of spiritual practice. Once again, razor's edge, so many ways to fall off the path. You can think, yes, I will do it. I will become a Jivan Mukti, the living free. I will become enlightened in this very life itself. Practice harder, sit more, go, go, go. And there is something to be said for that kind of fire, that kind of passion and determination. Absolutely. But it's worth observing, again, through that refining fire of our attention. Is it the little ego that's driving us so hard on the path? What are we really up to? When we really observe ourselves in our meditation, instead of this determined activity, there is a letting go. As Barry Magid puts it, When we stop fixing and avoiding, the empty space that is left is not empty, but actually is our life itself that contains everything that we thought was missing. When we stop fixing and avoiding, when we give up, what is it we're giving up? Our plans, our control, our sense of mastery, our sense that we're in charge, our determination to shape ourselves and the world to be exactly the way we want it. The first verse of the Isha Upanishad is engraved forever in my mind. The Lord is enshrined in the hearts of all. The Lord is the supreme reality. Rejoice in him through renunciation. Covet nothing. All belongs to the Lord. All belongs to the Lord. Everything we think we are, everything we've been so far, everything we want to be, all of it is the supreme self, capital S self, that supreme reality, Brahman, Buddha nature. Nothing is missing. It is our desperate attempts at control, at crafting ourselves and our lives that creates the sense of separation, that creates the sense of lack. When we give up, when we let go, when we put our full trust in the divine, when we rejoice in the Divine Mother through renunciation, when we trust in her grace, that is when we find within ourselves this deep joy, the ananda in Sanskrit, of being itself, of existence itself. As written in the Katha Upanishad, thus can we pass from fearful fragmentation to fearless fullness in the changeless whole. Thus can we pass from fearful fragmentation to fearless fullness in the changeless whole. So, after all this worrying, all this cogitating, all this working through tangles of traumas, all the fear of falling off the razor's edge of the path, all of the time spent trying to come alongside ourselves with the fire of our attention, we discover something miraculous. You can't fall off the path. All of our struggles on the path, our meditation, our mantra practice, our efforts to be kind to ourselves and one another, our rage, our hope, our frustration, our pettiness, our joy, all of it is the path. All of it is the path. I'll close with the last lines of a poem by the great Zen master Hakuin called Song of Zazen. It goes, if we turn inward and prove our true nature, that true self is no self, our own self is no self, we go beyond ego and past clever words. Then the gate to the oneness of cause and effect is thrown open. Not two and not three, straight ahead runs the way. Our form now being no form, in going and returning, we never leave home. Our thought now being no thought, our dancing and songs are the voice of the Dharma. How vast is the heaven of boundless samadhi. How bright and transparent the moonlight of wisdom. What is there outside us? What is there we lack? Nirvana is openly shown to our eyes. This earth where we stand is the pure lotus land, and this very body, the body of Buddha. When we give up, we truly give up our ideas and our hopes for this little self, body, mind. We see that nothing is missing. What is there outside us? What is there we lack? Everything that we experience, everything that we are, all of it is the self. All of it is Brahman. Ultimately, there is nothing but Buddha nature. you can't fall off the path. You are the path. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Before we can ask Raka some questions, I'm going to thank her for the wonderful exposition, the tangled psychological roots and branches. And yes, if you look at life, it seems so tangled. But there's always, there's a saying in the Upanishad. I'll quote the original. Ko heva nasya pranad yadi heva akasha anandan vasyat. Who would live, who would breathe if this joy wasn't there in our hearts? That joy definitely enlivens everything. So that is that's a joy there, which is there in every one of us. It's equated with life. It's equated with mind. And it is in the pursuit of that joy, all our activities. Sometimes when our activities slow down, it is then when all these crazy things come in our lives. The traumas, the abuses, all the emotions. When I can see people having this complaint, that complaint, I said they have slowed down. And the moment you speed up, those things just drop away. Outside, inside. So that's the way you live. You work in Zen, you live in Zen, you speak in Zen, and your entire life is Zen. And that is your Buddha nature, your real nature, which is joy. If that joy wasn't there, even the trouble of working would have overwhelmed us. That we are survived all the crazy things that have happened in our lives. When you sit down to meditate and you see the crazy things, think of that, wow, I've survived all these things. That's because of that joy. And in a way, Swamiji says, well, if you don't give it up voluntarily, nature will put a hand on your throat and make you open up. You don't come here to clutch. You come here to open your hands and give. And that is what, if you can remember this, ultimately it is, and the more you open your hands, the more they will be full. That is your heart, that is your life. So thank you once again, Raka, for wonderful Zen and the joy of giving up. We can do some questions. We can ask the in-person questions here. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, are there questions?
Yeah, of course. You read the question and then...
Oh, let me see. Yes. So how to deal with the guilt when we realize the mistakes we made in the past? Yeah, that is so painful. I mean, and that's one of these areas of the psychological pain that I was talking about. That, as Maharaj was just saying, when we sit, so much comes up, and we have insights into large and also just into our own behavior. And to me, it's both of that kind attention. The attention is the fire of attention, a refining fire, but it's also gentle. So seeing that because of all of the causes and conditions that led you to what took you to those mistakes, those harmful behaviors, you can find a way to integrate it somehow, to see that you were doing the best you could, and then to find a way to, let that kind attention carry you forward into a different, it's the recognize, no blame, change, right? Recognize, no blame, change. Yeah. Thank you. And then let's see. Oh, how does one sit through when negative emotions arise during meditation? Yeah, that's that's a tough one. I think this is the discipline of meditation, is that so often it is painful, and a lot of pain arises in it. And I think somehow turning your attention to that there is some sense of an inner guru, some sense of something within you that is guiding you, and bringing some sense of kindness and trust to your practice can help to sort of, to deal with some of that painful emotion. But, part of it is just also sitting through it. That's what I was saying at one point. I said, like, there's no way out but through. I think the power of practice is finding the commitment within yourself to sit with yourself as you have those negative thoughts, as that pain arises, and see that it shifts through, I would say through the grace of God. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes?
What is a practice we can remember in our day-to-day lives that will help us when we're feeling stressed or rushing a lot? Is there like anything that you use that sort of remind yourself to get back to that Zen space?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Well, Maharaj has been leading a beautiful series of talks on mantra yoga. So I was initiated into this tradition a few years ago. And so I always just come back to my mantra. There's this idea of ajapa japa, that once you have been practicing the mantra for long enough, like it just repeats itself in your mind. Yeah, and it just. Oh, sorry. The question was: is there a phrase or something that you can remember in your daily life as you go through your day that can help bring you back to your center?
Yeah, your Zen.
Your Zen. Yeah. Zen. Yes. Yeah. And so, yeah. So for me, it's the mantra. But in Zen, we use the anchor of the breath. So the breath is actually a very powerful, it carries so many things with it, right? It's like the life force, and it's also, it shows how we're not separate, right? Like air, breath, air. It shows this continuous exchange with the world. And it's just also activates our parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah, but for me, like the breath, kind of feeling into, I keep touching my heart, but like feeling into my heart. And then if you have a devotional practice, like the mantra, that's what I would say.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great question.
No more questions? I thought she would have been.
Yes, Oliver.
I teared up multiple times during your speech. Beautiful. A wonderful encapsulation of all of this journey. So I'm going to ask a less serious question. When you stopped to drink water, they were so perfectly timed to create these dramatic pauses. Was that intentional?
It was not intentional when the timing happened. That I just went with the flow. The question was, when I stopped to drink water, was that dramatically timed? But one of my Dharma brothers a few years ago had just mentioned that it's good to take some pauses and drink some water, and I have a tendency to just go. So there were just moments where I was like, let me take a sip of water. So spontaneous, very, very Zen. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay.
No? Okay. Well, we'll close with the chant.
Wait. Just,
Oh, the announcements.
just,
Yeah.
just the announcements, and then you can close with your prayer. Okay, keep standing though. As we know, Wednesday we have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna study group. It's conducted by Swami Avikarananda Ben. Friday, 7 p.m. Mantra Yoga. This coming Friday, it will be the 80-20 rule in japa and meditation. That's the 10th class here of the series. Saturday, we have Karma Yoga here at the Seattle Center. Sunday is Sri Sharada Devi's Puja. It'll start at 11 o'clock and it will go around till about 2 o'clock. We have a puja, we have a Raka singing, and then we have mother's children singing, and then there will be a prasad, lunch, etc. The Christ Puja, we're going to have it on 24th, as it's a tradition here in our order. So we celebrate it on 24th, the Christmas Eve, in the evening at 6 p.m. Mother's children, they are driving us and driving all of us into donating for foster kids. So this Mother's Children is our Sunday group school students. Okay.
And then
So
tonight we have Ram Nam also.
oh yeah, oh, how can I forget? Again, she's going to lead the Ram Nam this evening at 7 p.m. Okay, just.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Om peace, peace, peace to all beings.